Hi there and welcome. Following the foundation week, we've had 2 weeks of focus study on material, the first element of the formula. And as you've seen, actually all elements of the formula are present all the time. But we're just going to spend some time focusing on the specific elements to understand them in greater detail. I'd like to quote Bruce Lee at this point, who said that I don't fear the man who practices 10,000 kicks one time. I fear the man who practices one kick 10,000 times. Now there's many more material imbalances than the ones that we've looked at in the last couple of weeks. We've focused on the most important ones, the most commonly occurring ones, and the ones that will be of most use to you in practical play. Now practice these. It's better to practice these thoroughly, understand them thoroughly, than to get an overview without any thorough understanding of all possible material imbalances. So look at the ones we've studied and understand them thoroughly. This will do you a great service in practical play. This week we're going to focus on activity of the pieces. Now, when I'm teaching people who are just starting out with chess, I normally clear the board and put the piece on an empty board and then teach them how it moves. And when I was doing this, I noticed some things which will give us some insights into the activity of the pieces. Obviously the king is an active piece in the endgame, but I want to start with the queen for the purposes of today. In the centre of the board, the queen controls 28 squares. But on the edge, and even in the corner, she still controls 21 squares. Very interesting. So it's clear that the queen can do some very good work even when she's on the edge of the board. She's also less exposed there. The rook, on an open board, it doesn't matter where it is. In the centre, he controls 14 squares. On the edge, he controls 14 squares. In the corner, he controls 14 squares. Now, the importance of the squares he's controlling might have some relevance, but the number of squares he's actually controlling is the same where he is on the board. That's often why we don't need to put the rooks in the centre. They can rest on the edge and still have a great influence. The bishop, in the centre of the board, controls, same as the rook, 13 squares here. However, on the edge, or in the corner, 7 squares only. So the bishop does have much greater influence in the centre. But of course the most important is the knight. In the centre he controls 8 squares, on the edge only 4, and in the corner just 2. So this is clearly why we need to have advanced support points, central advanced support points for the knight to be effective. Just one other thing about the knight you'll notice is that, and we touched on this before in Good Knight against Bad Bishop, the knight sits, for example, here on a light square, but he's controlling dark squares. Interesting point. Whereas the bishop is always stuck on the same square, controlling the same coloured squares that it rests on, the knight controls the opposite coloured squares to the square on which it's sitting. Okay, what does all this mean for us? Well, it's not just the number of squares that pieces can go to which determines their activity, but also the quality of those squares. Are they key squares? I mean, if the knight's on the edge but controlling 4 critical squares, it might be more important than if he's in the centre but the squares aren't important. For example, if he's close to the king but on the edge. So the importance of the squares that they're having influence over is important. It's not just the number of squares they can go to. But that is the first indicator of the activity of the pieces, the number of squares they can go to. So think about this. Tomorrow we're going to look at pawns, and we're going to put the two together and come to some conclusions on when we should play with pawns and when we should play with our pieces. This is Roy Phillips. Thanks for listening.